sync it all back up.
Okay.
All right, Lynley.
All right, Ollie.
Sitting down for a rather impromptu chat. So, God, where do we even start? You know, I always say when I talk to people about you that I'm amazed how much information you can fit in the car trip between Kirribilli and here, all of 15 minutes. And so what I thought we'd do is just briefly go over your story.
All right.
And kind of just tease out gradually how that might have informed your work in the show. And you'll have to forgive my sluggishness today.
All as well.
As we know, I've been wiped out by a COVID booster. So you were born and raised in New Zealand.
So I was born and raised in a very small country town. I never felt I belonged. It was the sense, you know what you know, but I felt there was something I didn't know. And I was this tall, lanky, young kid, and within the context of a New Zealand country town, I was just something to be gawped at. So I came from something that considered normal to be very stereotypical. And when I did turn around about that 14, 15, 16, when the boys started to grow taller, and I actually started to associate with people outside of my community, and I realised, really without it being too conscious, but I realised that I had sort of gone from ugly duckling to swan, and I suddenly began to get a lot of attention. I was almost 6 foot tall, I was blonde, I was quite beautiful, but I was also I hadn't really even discovered myself. So it all came quite hard and fast. And I feel within that time, I probably did a lot of damage. I had a lot of misuse because I didn't realise the power that I had at the time. And I feel it really wasn't till I came to Australia when I was 20. I'd literally come fresh out of a hippie naked commune. I was very, very innocent. It was an innocent situation in many ways.
I mean, how much exposure would have you had to pop culture and the outside world?
I had no sophistication. So I had a lot of alternate life. I knew how to live a certain way. I had discovered some of myself, but when I came to Sydney, I realised that this is what I'd been waiting for. It was almost as if I'd put on a kid glove and I was here. And suddenly this world of aesthetics, this world of what I physically had, it became the world of sophistication, and I had to work hard and fast to get myself there. I worked in clubs, I did international catwalk, I worked in a few of the high-end like strip clubs or Playboy places in the world, and I sort of discovered the darker side at the same time as I was discovering a lighter side. So there I was, and in some ways I see that time of my life as being, I was still quite naive, but I knew I had a power. I knew physically I would have men following me on the bus. I would have men coming up to me and saying, "There's something about you, there's something," you know what I mean? I'd be walking home from a night shift or something and someone would be following me. It was a weird kind of power that I didn't really understand. I still to this day don't understand it. But
and it's not even like a manipulative power in terms of
at that point it wasn't.
It's no snake tongue. Your body is.
It was just simply there was something, and I couldn't even say specifically what that something was. But then I sort of grew into, I suppose, you know, look, I was so experimental. I think the whole thing was just, I could say, we talk about snake power, but I was so experimental. I was so interested in sexuality. I was a very sexual young woman, so I just did experiment. You know, I experimented a little bit with my attraction to women. I had a very, very close gay friend who had gay friends who had never slept with a woman. And so, and he looked on me like the queen of sex or something. I have no idea, darling, because it was so innocent. But he looked on me like, oh, you know, so he sort of said, and he was German, and he would come to me, darling, you know, would you do me a favour, kind of thing. And oh God, and so he asked me at one point, would I sleep with some men of his that had never slept with women, that had only been gay. But it was something they'd wanted to do, but they needed to do it in a very safe way. So I was willing. And to me it wasn't a moral thing. I didn't have that. It was more like, okay, let's see what this is about. Let's see what I can offer this. And then I would have a time where I thought I was low on cash. So I looked at that whole idea, well, my sexuality was so open that selling my body, it wasn't like a moral issue to me. It was simply like, okay, I got this.
It's interesting too that, like, coming from New Zealand as well,
very green.
If you grew up in Sydney, you might have had warning bells about that type of thing.
Boundaries.
Because of the kind of church state we're under here.
Where for me, and I don't regret it. I really think that looking at my sexuality so young and exploring it in the many, many ways I have, I think in the end it led me somewhere really positive. But again, I was raped in my mid-20s by someone, because I was so open, and by someone I knew. It was one of those things that I couldn't grapple with. My mind couldn't understand that, to take from me without my permission. So what I see is, up to that point, my sexuality had been my permission. Whether I had slept with two men, or a man and a woman, or slept with someone to teach them about sex, because I loved that role. But yeah, to that point, I think something happened in that, where I suddenly realised I needed some boundaries. I needed to be more self-aware.
I can't even imagine how terrifying that flip would have been.
It was really confusing for me. It was just it was more confusing than terrifying. It was like, did that actually happen? It was such a surreal moment.
Yeah, a bit like, what now too?
Yeah. And I was at that time I hadn't married my first husband, but I was with him. We did have an open relationship. This guy was someone I knew, but he imposed himself on me quite violently. And it really was a turning point for me. I realised suddenly there was a dangerous world out there. And I think these things, there's still a real openness that I have, that I want. When I started my masters, I wanted to take a look at that whole idea of, as women that by being open and being sensual and being sexual, are we feeding the male gaze, or are we actually allowing it? So these are sort of questions that popped up as I did my work.
Yeah, I think we should probably get into the gaze a bit more, because that's very important to your work. Is there any experiences internationally, once you were overseas modelling and doing different things, were there any experiences there that sort of shaped this work? Like, I know having an audience in clubs and whatever.
Yeah,
Been,
I think there was positives and negatives in that type of industry and type of work, and I was never 100% comfortable. Like even as a catwalk model, I was never 100% comfortable. There was always a part of me that was objectifying myself, that was looking at how do these people see me? What am I to these people? And I think I think at that point in time, I found being a woman quite conflictual, quite the opposite of where I'd come from, where I started to question, okay, who is looking at me? And often it was women looking at me through the male gaze. So that also was part of informing my work. I realised that the male gaze was not only men looking at women.
Yeah, I
it was women looking at women.
Yeah, like the men have shaped how the women
absolutely
look at each other.
And through John Burgess' work in 1972, he talked very openly about the male gaze, and he really brought in artistically, or to a larger audience, that idea that maybe we should start questioning it because it had been so long historically. So I think, through perhaps reading some of his stuff and looking at Laura Mulvey and how she approached it through the camera, like these people began to question it. And I think in that time in the 80s, I too began to question it. And it was only a little voice in the back of my head, and as I've got older, it's become more apparent to me. And I think things like the Me Too campaign recently, things that have brought the possibility of empowerment to women, they've helped me, in a way they've helped me re-engage.
Cool. Let's take a quick break. I'll change the camera over. Alright, so talking about your work, it's good that it's right in front of me too. Makes life a bit easier. So there's a lot you've been doing. You've been painting, you've got prints up there, but also these very tactile paper mache sculptures. And this sort of goes back to New Zealand again, doesn't it? You know, you said you grew up with your mum with a lot of textiles.
So my mother is an artist. She's 83 and she's still selling work.
Still kicking.
Oh, she's still kicking. She drives her little car around to all these different places. She has exhibitions with other people, and she's still very much a vibrant artist, very traditional. But as a child, my sister and I just grew up with pencils, paints. It was just part of our life. Every day we would have done something. She taught us to knit, she taught us fundamentals of crochet, she taught us to sew, she taught us to use our hands, and we never thought about it. So I think for me, the whole mixed media thing comes from the fact that it just seems very natural to me. So whether I had to reteach myself to crochet, but whether it's crocheting recycled wire, or whether it's painting or using photography or doing sculpture, for me it's just busy hands. I've always enjoyed having busy hands, and I sort of stopped for a while, just while I was doing so much investigation into my own life. I had years of therapy, and I think this process of coming to NAS is far more personal than say doing 3 years at TAFE and then going and doing my BFA. It was a very generalised kind of situation where doing my Masters really enabled me to hone in on an autobiographical sense of my work. And I think at my age, I wanted to do a retrospective. I feel my life has just been so colourful, but I didn't want to write it. Yeah. Because I've done some stupid things as well. And they're not only embarrassing, they're hard to talk about. And I think just being able to go through my own process as an artist and work it out that way, I feel like I've released so much of what I've held on to.
Yeah. And so with these inviting vulvas, these ram skulls, I guess we've got to get a bit into the genitalia. Because
So, well, this in itself has evolved over the time. They were one of my first works. And the ram itself is quite a masculine figure, but
country man caves everywhere.
Exactly, but I chose it because it was fierce, and because I think the whole Georgia O'Keeffe thing a little bit affected me, where she made horns into fallopian tubes, and the face of them is actually significant as an empty vessel. And because I'm looking at para-feminism, which I'll explain, I wanted there to be something very tactile and something very where you felt you wanted to move in, and as you moved in you actually realised you were looking at vulvas as opposed to mouth. So they became a way of me exposing the vulva, because when we talk about female genitalia, we talk about the vagina, and it's only a part of what we are, and the vulva is so in a way missed out upon, and so I wanted to express a kind of, like, one of them is called it's luscious, so there's these big lips, and in a way they are friends of mine, you know, but I look at how society now has condemned that. These women out there trimming and having surgery and trying to have this perfect sort of vulva for the male gaze. So I wanted to challenge that. So in a sense, but more recently, as I decided to name them, I realised, well, I have, one of my daughters is a circus artist, and she has access to all, and she's very much like me, a woman's woman, so she has access to pole dancers and all these people that train in different ways. So I have actually named these after young women that I've met that work in the stripping industry. And in real life, they're the girl next door. But they make their money out of their bodies. And I understand that. And I know that it is not a moral issue. It is not a moral issue. But I wanted as well, in a way, to honour them. But I also wanted to expose the vulva as something to be accepted. So that's sort of the gist of that work.
Yeah, and I can sense that, like, even in just the very brief summation of your story that you've already established, that flipping of the gaze is very important to that work.
Yes.
Yeah.
And because they are ram's heads, they are also looking back at you.
Back. Yeah.
So there's a sense of, I've got you. You know, who is in control here? So I feel they're quite a powerful work. And they sort of led me into doing the little purses.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so the purses are about female collateral. They're questioning that whole thing where a man's money is his sexual appeal. It's just an idea, and a woman's availability is hers, or a woman's beauty is her collateral. So those works really were questioning that. And one of them actually is representing genital mutilation, and then they go right through to a kind of a Playboy kind of thing, and then
my favourite's the granny fanny.
The granny fanny, yeah. So they all give you something, you know what I mean? So, and there's one that's got a tampon, you know, and I just wanted to normalise things in a way, or just have people think. So they were just a very cool little expression, you know, that I didn't, I wasn't even sure I was going to keep, and then I loved them. They're made out of glow mesh, purses, which again, you know, that's a very slang term for a woman's genitalia. It's her purse, it's her snatch. So I played with that, but I wanted them to be Australian, so that's why I made them out of glow mesh. So it's just like there's all these little things that I've included in the background. And I went from there into the penis mask. So I went.
Yeah, the penis masks. We've got to talk about those.
Okay.
And the process of making those.
Well, they were pretty tough. They were the tougher because I had to make the moulds, and it wasn't a matter of going, because they had to be big and they had to be exciting. I couldn't go around to my male friends and say, well, look, can I take a mould of your penis? So I made them, but I had to get on the porn sites to do it. So I was looking for...
You can imagine how insecure they'd be.
Oh, I know.
If you came to me and said, can I take it? It's like, no, you don't
it's
need.
not happening. Okay,
No,
so it
not
was
big
just,
enough.
I had to think outside of the box. So I thought, okay, I've got to make these goddamn things. And it was so interesting because getting on the porn site day after day, I actually found it quite hard. And I actually found it affecting me. It affected me.
Oh, yeah, porn's
because they're
pretty
brutal.
fucked up.
It's pretty brutal.
Oh, yeah.
But it was interesting to make the moulds but I made them all quite different, and then to attach them to this idea of a mask. So I was very much taking it from the old Venetian health mask, where they had the beaks, and they thought somehow it protected them from the plague.
Oh yeah, the bubonic plague.
Yeah. So that was in my mind somewhere, and I'd got that from a trip we did in Prague, I think, where there were a lot of masks. And so anyway, that was quite hard to do, but actually when I fundamentally got them off the mould and I started to dress them, and so they start off, the cotton rag goes on the mould, and that gives me quite a solid, structure. Then I peel them off the mould, and then it's a matter of decorating them, and I actually found that part of it so easy and so beautiful. It was no different to painting. So the layers of mulberry paper or Japanese rice paper, it became something beautiful. But when I was researching and making the molds, it was very, very...
Research what, WikiHow?
Yeah.
How to make a cock?
No, I was researching porn sites. It was
Right.
not so much how to make a cock, because that was just an artistic thing.
It was
just
sourcing
more sourcing the right ones, and just looking on big cock websites. And it was just, I got to the point where my husband's penis didn't look like this. You know what I mean? It was like, I've got to stop doing this because it's affecting me. And I don't know how. I looked at that actually from the perspective of porn addiction, and I thought, my God, this is something that people delve into all the time.
Oh, it's scary to see how far along that's come.
Yeah,
Like, even
and young
when
people.
I was a teenager.
Yeah, young people, and it's not a real world. So, but getting back to the mask, because that was just something of my journey. I wanted to look at the male gaze, and I had a couple of little cute things that happened. So Sophie, who's a student here, and she's been very much involved in my art making because we're very good friends. And one day she was at the bus stop and she called me. She said, "Oh my God, Lynley, I've just had an experience of your masks." She said there was a guy who was leering over my shoulder, and all I could see was that male gaze coming towards me. And then I had another little aha moment with Joe, my supervisor, where I put the mask on. And I could see him sitting, and he said, "Oh my God, is that how women feel?" It was a real moment. So I could see the power of them in that. And I really created them in a sense that when you put a mask on, you think you're hiding. You think no one knows who you are. But in this particular gaze, it's obvious what you're thinking. So there's that sense of the gazer is gazing, but they're not hidden. And so what they're gazing upon is very much aware. So they've got these little also components to them. I think they're quite spectacular and very strong. Very hard to look at for some people.
Yeah. Oh, the one with the piercing particularly.
Yeah.
That any man that can look at that,
It's pretty
don't
brave.
understand.
Yeah, it's pretty brave.
And I like how you've personalised them all too.
Yeah.
Like that's the really nice
so
thing.
they're named after ex-partners, but that particular one, I didn't name it appropriately because that particular one is actually the female male gaze. And it was part of that realisation that women also have the male gaze, and in some ways it's more pronounced and more exaggerated and far more critical, Where a man might lust, a woman's male gaze is often very critical or very comparable. Are my breasts big enough? Are my...
Self-surveilling.
Yes, because that's where the male gaze has us.
Yeah.
It has us objectifying ourselves. So there's all those little bits of that male gaze that come into play. So, and I actually think they're my most powerful work.
Yeah, and so something that seems very important too when we talked the other day was this idea of contingencies, that, you know, throughout your life, that your relationships have been a defining part in shaping your identity.
That's exact.
And I like what the lenticulars are doing in terms of that, because you went and sourced nips and lips from all your mates. Did you want to talk a bit about those prints and relationships?
So basically, I went from the sculptures to the self-portraits, which I'll talk really briefly about.
Actually, talk about the paintings.
So I was sick of doing sculpture, and I wanted to come back to my roots, which is drawing and painting. So, and I was just looking at and I started to investigate the female gaze, and I started to look at, well, what is the female gaze? And I think, you know, years ago, Laura Mulvey, who continued on from John Burge's work, she started to look through cinematography at, well, this is how men are doing it. So how as women are we going to do it? So as time went on, I think people like Jane Campion and Jill Soloway, they're people behind the camera that have started to investigate, well, what is a female gaze? What is it really? And it's still something we're trying to figure out. It's still very much an evolving concept, and it depends, and because we have...
I very rarely see a consensus.
And because sexuality has become so diverse now, what is normal now is so diverse. And in a way, I think Jane Campion comes at things very much from the female feeling. It's often her main character is a very feeling character. She has experiences that we witness, so we see it from a woman's point of view. Where Jill Soloway, she did Transparent, and she was she's a cisgendered woman, but she was a woman who went from being straight to being gay, and so her transgender particularly has this diversity in it. So there's straight people to becoming gay, there's people coming out, there's people accepting diversity generally. And I think when I looked at the female gaze, I had to bring it into my own life and bring it really from the point of view of, well, what is it to me? So I've done 5 paintings, and they're all related to if someone is looking at me and I'm partially naked and vulnerable, how can I paint myself in a way that isn't coy, that isn't asking for it?
God, I hate that.
Oh my God, which is what the guy that raped me said to me. So that has stayed in my head.
Yeah.
You are asking for it. So it's these kind of little things that come back, and they do inform you. Your life, for me, has informed my work. So in these particular paintings, I have either, and most of them, I have gazed back, or I have not allowed for that. You are asking for it. So I think that is really one of the very things that informed that work for me. How can I expose myself and be vulnerable and normalise the female body without asking for it?
Yeah.
And I'm at an age where I don't see myself as I did when I was younger as well. So it was a very of the present time.
Yeah, and I like the way the paintings kind of spell that out too, in that there's, you know, the flat colours really conceal, and then your body is, you know, you've done those workshops with Kim in like, you know, old style
school
painting with lots and lots of glazes.
That's exactly right.
It's amazing when you paint with glazes, like how many colours you can build into the painting without
actually covering it. Yeah. So that's sort of how I did play with it. I mean, Kim Spoon has been a great influence to me as far as I've just sat in her workshops, and she talks a lot. And what I've done with that is just picked up bits. I've sat there or watched her demonstrate, but mostly I just listened to her talking to people. And I've taken a lot of things on board and then just made them my own. So with those particular ones that are in the studio, I very much did glaze after glaze after glaze after glaze, and they didn't work. You know, it was just a thing that you can actually look and you almost feel like you're peering in. Where this little one, my little Mona Lisa self, I painted it. So I used, oil paint as a paint medium. So there's not any glazing on that one. I painted it quite differently, and I think it's given a different result.
Yeah, I think it's probably given a stronger lightness,
Yeah.
but just without that same textural.
Without the
effect.
luminosity. Yeah, I agree. So anyway, I looked at that, and then from there, I realised that I needed to resolve. Like I had the male gaze and I had the female gaze, and never were the two going to meet. And I think I think men are also learning that they too can have the female gaze. They can look at women differently. They can look at women as a feeling subject as opposed to an object. So the lenticulars came about through this idea that I want.
I'm gonna have to flip it over. Sorry, Lynley.
That's right.
So, take two. That's how bugging I am. Give us a clap. Nothing's recording.
So to the lenticulars.
Oh yeah.
So what
Hang on, I've got to turn on the green screen.
Oh, there we go. Just like that. So with the lenticulars, they were my resolution. So what I was wanting to do was to find a way to marry the male and female gaze. And I wanted it to be, in a sense, in the blink of an eye. So
it really
isn't-
flips.
It
before
really
you do it.
flips. That's right.
Yeah.
So I wanted I wanted both ideas to feed each other, and to, in a way, allow each other to speak a new language. It was something in that idea that if we can bring the two together, they can really soften each other. And I think there's something very valuable in that, because I don't think the male gaze is going to go away. And I think the female gaze will develop more and more. You know, as
Well, and I think the more that we articulate the female gaze, the more the male gaze is going to break down.
that's right, and it will morph. So I don't think it's going to go away, but I think there'll be a morphing, there'll be a softening, there'll be a conscious understanding of what's going on.
I think a softening is a really nice term for it too, because I mean, like, elements of it is biological. We
Yes,
can't escape
that's,
that.
that's why I'm saying it's not going to go away. But an understanding can change everything.
Yeah,
And
soften the edges around
Yes.
these harsh
Yes.
realities.
yes. and also, you know, dialogue, the way we talk to ourselves, that can change too. And I think with the lenticulars, because I'd done the self-portraits, I wanted to keep them personal. But I knew that doing a selfie of my own nipple X amount of times was not going to work. So I put out on Facebook, actually, to friends and family if they would take a selfie of their nipple. That's how it began. It began really with the nipple. And I've looked at that, you know, really, you know, how we have all these issues, especially in America, where anything that has a nipple is covered over. So I thought, well, if I just have the nipple and not the breast, how does that change it?
Yeah.
You know,
That's a good point.
and I was looking, and I thought, my God, they're like flowers. They're all different, and they become something completely different. So that gave me the idea to put the blooms on top. It was very female and very blossoming.
Yeah, because that's a really interesting point. Like they censor this bit,
Yeah.
but it's like,
But all the breast, all
but
the breast tissue.
they'll promote this bit.
I know.
Yeah.
So it just seems so stupid.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to take the bit that's censored
Yeah.
And I'm going to play with it and make it so that people can look at it. So I think putting it as a lenticular print with the bloom, it becomes something people aren't afraid of. And it becomes a playful curiosity. I stood here on opening night and it was like people moving across the screen.
Yeah, I've been watching out of the corner of my eye. There's people wandering through now.
And it's like they go, oh, and then they come back, and then they say, oh, and it's something you wouldn't do normally. So I feel in that way, look, it was a wonderful process, so generous of people to give me and trust me with it. Really, and there's 3 of our cohort in there. So it was just an honour to me that would happen. With the lips, it was so much easier to get the images, and they are images of, again, family and friends, ranging from 9 years old to 83. My mother, who's 84 actually.
The lips, not the nips. We'll make
the
that
lips,
distinction.
Not the nips. So I know, and I love that rhyming, the nips and lips. So anyway, and so I turned them on their side so that they were impersonating in a way vulvas. But I also have seen men follow women's lips, and you just know that they're thinking of a blowjob. You just know. And so I thought, well, okay, they are sexualized, and so I had this idea. So what can I overlay them with? Where the lips are so soft and so sensual. So I had this, and I was trying to think, what is a phallic? Because I've used the blooms, very female. What is a phallic organic plant? So the cactus came to me first, and then the Peter peppers. And the Peter peppers are the ones that look so much like penises. So they're just a wonderful overlay, and again it talks to the male gaze, but it integrates them in a playful way. Because they said, we're not going to get rid of it. So let's soften it. Let's take the prickles off it. Let's move it into something palatable.
And I like that element of fun too. That feels really important because, like, it is fun, and you know, I laugh more often than not when you show me new work.
Yeah, because I want it to be fun, and I don't want to be an angry feminist. It's not what I want. I want to say what I want to say in a really fun way, and also because I used para-feminism, which has that approach of parody and humour, and it is a contemporary form of feminism. It really helped me in that it gave me permission to have fun with what we normally, which is normally considered abject, or in the past where feminism has been considered angry. Para-feminism allows us to even laugh at ourselves. So in a way I feel I really went full circle, and I resolved something really deep in myself through doing this. But I also feel the work, which was very obsessive work, it came to a conclusion of its own. So where I go from here, I've no idea, Ollie, but it's been a great journey.
It's been great, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for tuning in.
And thank you. And thank you for your time, Ollie. It's been a great experience.
Fucking crash into a million trillion pieces.